Peachy Books presents COVID-19 The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malaret. Read to you by PeachyTO. 1.1.3 Complexity. In its simplest possible form, complexity can be defined as what we don't understand or find difficult to understand. As for a complex system, the psychologist Herbert Simon defined it as one made up of a large number of parts that interact in a non-simple way. Complex systems are often characterized by an absence of visible causal links between their elements, which makes them virtually impossible to predict. Deep in ourselves, we sense that the more complex a system is, the greater the likelihood that something might go wrong, and that an accident or an aberration might occur and propagate. Complexity can roughly be measured by three factors. 1. The amount of information content or the number of components in a system. 2. The interconnectedness, defined as the dynamic of reciprocal responsiveness between these pieces of information or components. And 3. The effect of nonlinearity. Nonlinear elements are often called tipping points. Nonlinearity is a key feature of complexity because it means that a change in just one component of a system can lead to a surprising and disproportionate effect elsewhere. It is for this reason that pandemic models so often yield wide ranges of outcomes. A difference of assumption regarding just one component of the model can dramatically affect the end result. When one hears about black swans, known unknowns, or butterfly effects, nonlinearity is at work. It thus comes as no surprise that we often associate world complexity with surprises, turbulence, and uncertainty. For example, in 2008, how many experts anticipated that mortgage-backed securities originating in the United States would cripple banks around the world and ultimately bring the global financial system to the verge of collapse? And in the early weeks of 2020, how many decision-makers foresaw the extent to which a possible pandemic would wreak havoc on some of the most sophisticated health systems in the world and would inflict such major damage to the global economy? A pandemic is a complex adaptive system comprising many different components or pieces of information, as diverse as biology or psychology, whose behavior is influenced by such variables as the role of companies, economic policies, government intervention, healthcare politics, or national governance. For this reason, it can and should be viewed as a living network that adapts to changing conditions, not something set in stone, but a system of interactions that is both complex and adaptive. It is complex because it represents a cat's cradle of interdependence and interconnections from which it stems, and adaptive in the sense that its behavior is driven by interactions between nodes, the organizations, the people, us, that can become confused and unruly in times of stress. Will we adjust to the norms of confinement? Will a majority of us, or not, abide by the rules, etc.? The management, the containment in this particular case, of a complex adaptive system requires continuous real-time but ever-changing collaboration between a vast array of disciplines and between different fields within these disciplines. Just to provide a broad and oversimplified example, the containment of the coronavirus pandemic will necessitate a global surveillance network capable of identifying new outbreaks as soon as they arise, laboratories in multiple locations around the world that can rapidly analyze new viral strains and develop effective treatments, large IT infrastructures so that communities can prepare and react effectively, appropriate and coordinated policy mechanisms to efficiently implement the decisions once they are made, and so on. The important point is this: each separate activity by itself is necessary to address the pandemic, but is insufficient if not considered in conjunction with the others. It follows that this complex adaptive system is greater than the sum of its parts. Its effectiveness depends on how well it works as a whole, and it is only as strong as its weakest link. Many pundits have mischaracterized the COVID-19 pandemic as a black swan event simply because it exhibits all the characteristics of a complex adaptive system. But in reality, it is a white swan event, something explicitly presented as such by Nassim Taleb in The Black Swan, published in 2007, something that would eventually take place with a great deal of certainty. Indeed, for years, international organizations like the World Health Organization, WHO, institutions like the World Economic Forum and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI, launched at the annual meeting 2017 in Davos, and individuals like Bill Gates have been warning us about the next pandemic risk, even specifying that it, 1, would emerge in a highly populated place where economic development forces people and wildlife together, 2, would spread quickly and silently by exploiting networks of human travel and trade, and 3, would reach multiple countries by thwarting containment. As we will see in the following chapters, properly characterizing the pandemic and understanding its characteristics are vital, because they were what underpinned the differences in terms of preparedness. Many Asian countries reacted quickly because they were prepared logistically and organizationally due to SARS, and thus were able to lessen the impact of the pandemic. By contrast, many Western countries were unprepared and were ravaged by the pandemic. It is no coincidence that they are the ones in which the false notion of a black swan event circulated the most. However, we can confidently assert that the pandemic, a high probability, high consequences white swan event, will provoke many black swan events through second, third, fourth, and more order effects. It is hard, if not impossible, to foresee what might happen at the end of the chain when multiple order effects and their ensuing cascades of consequences have occurred after unemployment spikes, companies go bust, and some countries are teetering on the verge of collapse. None of these are unpredictable per se, but it is their propensity to create perfect storms when they conflate with other risks that will take us by surprise. To sum up, the pandemic is not a black swan event, but some of its consequences will be. The fundamental point here is this: complexity creates limits to our knowledge and understanding of things. It might thus be that today's increasing complexity literally overwhelms the capabilities of politicians in particular, and decision-makers in general, to make well-informed decisions. A theoretical physicist turned head of state, President Armen Sarkisian of Armenia, made this point when he coined the expression quantum politics, outlining how the classical world of post-Newtonian physics, linear, predictable, and to some extent even deterministic, had given way to the quantum world. Highly interconnected and uncertain, incredibly complex, and also changing depending on the position of the observer. This expression recalls quantum physics, which explains how everything works and is the best description we have of the nature of the particles that make up matter and the forces with which they interact. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare this quantum world. If you've enjoyed this reading, please let me know by clicking the like button, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell so that you know when another story is available. Please visit peachybooks.ca to read my reviews and have some lively discussions about great books. Thanks for listening.